sewing friends, welcome to my sewing room. My name is Beth, and if you're new, welcome. Recently I made a quilt block called Star and Octagon, and I wanted to make multiples so that I could make a table runner, and here they are. I just needed 3 of the quilt blocks to make my table runner today. I'll be surrounding my quilt blocks with 2-inch strips of the background fabric, and I need 2 to begin with to go between my blocks, so I will cut the 2 strips 8 inches long. I cut another strip 2 inches wide by the width of the fabric, and I'll need enough to go along both sides of my table runner. I pinned those long strips on the front of the table runner, right sides together, and I did leave the ends hanging, and after I add these long strips I will trim the ends. I pressed those 2 long strips, and now all I need to do is to add the 2 strips on each end. I'm in my newer sewing room in Texas, so my supplies are limited, but I did bring a piece of batting and it was the perfect size for my table runner. And I also had this nice green fabric in my small stash here, and I'm going to add that to the back of my table runner. It's both the batting and the backing are a little bit bigger than my table runner. And next up I'll be quilting this beautiful table runner. I have a few safety pins, so I'm going to baste my table runner with some safety pins. I'll be using my little Singer featherweight to quilt my little quilt here, so I gave myself a larger stitch, and I'm going to be putting quilting lines diagonally through my table runner using the quilt blocks as my guide. I'll just be going through the small 2-inch squares and half square triangles, so it's pretty easy to follow along with the design of my quilt. Here's the back where you can easily see the design, the crosshatch design of the quilting lines. And now I can add the binding. I'll cut away that excess backing and batting using the table runner or the small quilt as my guide. I have 2 strips here that are cut the width of fabric 1.5 inches wide. It's just going to be a single layer of binding, and I'll be placing this on the front of my table runner. going to fold that end down sort of at making a triangle, and this will be covering the end of the binding when I get all the way around. This is just a really easy way to get all the binding raw edges on the inside. After sewing down that first little section, I stopped before the corner about a 1/4 inch away from the end, and I pivoted and made a couple of stitches just off the corner of that little quilt. And now I'll turn my table runner or my quilt and I'll pull the binding up and down, and now there's a fold on the top, and I'm going to begin sewing right on that fold, and I'll do the same thing all the way around my quilt. When I got to the end, the tail of my binding will cover that little fold that I put in there right when I started, and I'm going to sew right over that fold, and then I'll cut off the excess binding, and when I turn my binding to the back side, all of the raw edges will be inside and will be hidden. I'll roll the binding to the back and tuck in the raw edge, and I'll pin all the way around, and then I'm going to hand sew the binding down on the back. This table runner is a gift, but I think it looks great here in my sewing room right next to all of these little animals that I've been knitting recently, a pattern by Susan B. Anderson that I've really been enjoying. But I also think the table runner looks great in the entry here. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.